Joining us, senior writer at The Dispatch and MS Now contributor David Drucker. Retired four-star General Barry McCaffrey is going to join us in just a moment, and senior fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Oh, there's General Stephen Cook is with us. General, really good to have you. Talk to me about what your sense of where things stand are. I personally am having a hard time following it.
Well, look, I've worked with 3 different presidents' national security councils. We no longer have a national security process at all. I think we have some unhinged postings from the President of the United States that the armed forces are reading at the same time as the Secretary of Defense. Going forward, it seems clear to me that both the Iranians and Trump have very important political, economic, and military reasons to want to continue the ceasefire. My guess that's going to happen. But Mr. Trump is certainly capable of going back to escalation. I think the other thing we ought to understand is that the pressure on Trump has made him look desperate in the eyes of the Iranians. So I think they've now established an ongoing and probably permanent sense that they control the Strait of Hormuz, 110, 150 ships a day. And finally, I think we ought to recognize U.S. Armed Forces as the dominant military in the face of the earth. The Navy, surface Navy, has been absolutely extraordinary in conducting this blockade. They've turned back more than 27 ships already. They've seized a ship, but they're incapable of guaranteeing safety to giant oil tankers transiting that Gulf. So Mr. Trump's stuck.
Stephen, what do you think?
Well, I think that the prospects for escalation, the ceasefire ends on Wednesday. I think the fact that there's going to be discussions on Tuesday make it less likely that we're going to see an escalation on Wednesday. And I think the president will spin that as, the negotiations are going so well, and this is a new regime and how wonderful it is, and that they'll continue those negotiations. But the negotiations are one thing. Bridging the vast divides between the United States and Iran is something entirely different. And as General McCaffrey just pointed out, the Iranians believe that they're winning, and they come back to Islamabad with generally maximal demands to meet the U.S.'s maximal demands. They suspect that the president will blink. They're not going to come off those maximal demands.
So that's a tough position. What about what the general was just laying out, that the Iranians now know that they can use the Strait, they can leverage the Strait? How do we ever get back to normal with that? And how can the president accept a scenario going forward where the Iranians, if they decide to push or decide they want nuclear capabilities or whatever, just close the Strait and put pressure not just on the U.S., but the global economy? Stephen.
Well, the Iranians aren't going to give it up, and we're not going to go back to normal. They have discovered this leverage, which previously was notional. And the belief was that the United States would have the capability to keep the Strait open. And so now, given the fact that this is so valuable, it's probably even more valuable to them at this point than their nuclear program, that they will negotiate until they have some level of control over the Strait of Hormuz, which is a big problem for the United States, which is committed to freedom of navigation, and a bigger problem for our partners in the Gulf, the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Iraqis, who have some capacity to send their energy resources in other directions, but the Strait is critical for their economic well-being.
All right. So, David, what's the reaction in the White House to all of this? Is there a coherent sense of the path forward from the people you're speaking with?
I mean, I think we're all where you started out the show, Katie, and that is the president says one thing and then says another thing. The realities on the ground may appear one way because of things that he has said and negotiations that are happening, and then it shifts within hours. I think that's been the hardest part of this, is trying to report this out accurately and fairly, while taking into account that you can't trust the Iranians, who have been lying for years. The president, led us to believe at the end of last week that a deal was at hand and that Tehran had agreed to everything, right? I'm almost quoting him verbatim. And within hours, that turned out not to be the case. And so as we're trying to sort of gauge where this thing stands and where it's headed, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I think one of the things we have seen is that the president is under an enormous amount of domestic political pressure, right? He's under pressure here at home because oil markets continue to be rocked, gas prices are high, and American voters are extremely unhappy. And we've even seen the outer bands of the Republican coalition begin to express some doubts, right? If you're a self-defined MAGA voter, you're on board with this thing still. But people are starting to get restless because we're now, headed toward the 2-month mark, and we don't really know what a resolution means and when we're going to get a resolution. And I think this might be easier for us to gauge, and I think voters might feel a little bit better if this wasn't a moving target. But the way that the president talks about the progress in the war is as a moving target, and that makes things even more unsettled than they normally are when we're at war.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about not being able to trust the Iranians, which, as you say, and as you're correct on, have not been telling the truth for years, you now have a president who you can't trust what he says because he's also all over the place and has been lying for years. It's a double-edged sword in terms of negotiations. You mentioned the approval ratings, or you alluded to them, David. Let me put them up on the screen. Donald Trump, again, 37% approval. But let me show you what it breaks down to on the war itself. This is NBC, 54% strongly disapprove, 82% of independents, but also 26% of Republicans. And then if you're talking about a little bit further on that breakdown, 61% want no further U.S. military action in Iran. 74% under the age of 30 want the war to end. And 87% of MAGA supporters approve of Trump or Iran. So MAGA is still decent. 87% is decent. But again, Donald Trump needs to be in the 90s there in order to be a force politically because of the way the demographics break down in this country. How nervous is the White House regarding that? I mean, the Wall Street Journal had a really detailed report over the weekend talking about how Donald Trump has been furious and freaked out over the way this war has been going.
Yeah, so this is really reminiscent of what we dealt with in the first term, right? I mean, whatever we want to say about the first year of this second term, there weren't a lot of leaks, and there was a sense that Donald Trump was in command and that his staff was delivering as he requested. Right. And what we've seen the longer this war has gone on is a sort of reversion to the second term where the president seems not grounded and where we're getting a lot of information that the White House doesn't necessarily want out there. I know from talking to Republicans involved in campaigns, and that includes people connected to the White House, that the White House political team and the political professionals surrounding the president understand the reality of the political atmosphere as we get closer to the midterm elections. They're very attuned to it and they're very aware of it. But, everything comes back to the president and whether or not he's going to stay on some sort of message. He's not, he never has. Whether he's going to acknowledge that inflation continues to roil Americans' pocketbooks. He's not, he never has. And there's only so much that can be done in that regard. And as you pointed out, and this is very, I think, key here, the president assembled a pretty impressive coalition that carried him to victory in 2024. And that the people closest to him in that coalition, his most loyal voters, are still with him. The doubts have started to creep in now when you're dealing with the outer bands of the coalition. The further away you get from committed Republican, self-described MAGA voter to people that didn't like, the last administration, had issues with the Democratic Party. These are the people, younger voters and the like, that have simply said, this isn't what I voted for. This isn't what he said he would do. That's the problem that he and his party are facing, 6 months out.
On the subject of leaks and stuff that Donald Trump might not want out there, again, this Journal report is full of really shocking detail. General, there's also one that talks about how after the U.S. jet was shot down and those two Aviators were missing. The president had to be kept out of the room for updates. Here, let me read it. Aides kept the president out of the room as they got minute-by-minute updates because they believed his impatience wouldn't be helpful. Instead, updating him at meaningful moments, a senior administration official said. That's shocking. Is it shocking? Am I wrong to say it's shocking, General? Or is that normal for the president to be kept at an arm's length during moments like this?
This is a president who wanted to invade and seize Greenland from a NATO ally, who wanted to annex Canada, who wanted to seize the Panama Canal. I think he is hysterical at this point. I mean, for him to assume that losing an aircraft over Iran would be the equivalent of seizing the embassy with 100 staffers was illogical. Let me add one other thing. The most important national security objective we have in this war in Iran right now is stopping, delaying their nuclear weapons program. They're never going to give it up. If we want to delay it, we have to negotiate, get some kind of an agreement, and put IAEA inspectors on the ground. If he doesn't do this, basically he has devastated Iran tactically and missed the boat on why we were concerned about the Iranian nuke program.